Welcome to OOTO, the out-of-the-office investigation into personal health actualization. This time we're discussing edible mushrooms for mental and physical health.
Hello, it's great to be here. We are looking at something that for many of us is just a grocery item, fungi, but we're finding they move so far beyond simple nutrition.
Right. They seem to play this really crucial dual role in supporting our metabolic health and enhancing our mental well-being.
It's a fascinating connection.
I think so too, because the data we're looking at is so specific. Our goal today is to really get into these new cohort studies and clinical trials to see, how does incorporating edible fungi actually impact our internal systems, everything from metabolism all the way to brain connectivity.
It's a huge range.
It is. So we have to start with the big question. How can edible mushrooms for mental and physical health affect our mental and physical health?
That's the core of it, isn't it? And what the sources really suggest is that the impact is so systemic that making these smart daily dietary choices is, well, it's just critical. I mean, understanding edible mushrooms for mental and physical health and making healthy daily choices for diet, behaviors, and medical care is critical to our physical and mental health and recovery from hypertension.
Absolutely. So our plan is this. We'll start with the hard physical evidence, how mushrooms affect metabolism, including a really surprising link to thyroid health and even weight regulation.
And from there, we'll zoom in on some key neuroprotective compounds, things like vitamin D and ergothioneine.
Exactly. And then we'll broaden out and explore some of the really intriguing findings that connect the entire fungal kingdom to these profound cognitive and even psychological shifts.
Okay, so let's jump in with those physical benefits, because the evidence here it's really robust. We have the results of a huge prospective cohort study. They looked at edible mushroom consumption and something called subclinical thyroid dysfunction, or SETD.
And when you say huge, you mean it. This was over 6,000 participants.
6,631 to be exact. A massive group followed very closely over time.
And just for context, SETD, that means someone has abnormal thyroid-stimulating hormone levels, TSH, but their active thyroid hormone is still testing in the normal range. It's that subtle imbalance.
Exactly. The kind of thing that often flies under the radar. So in this study, the incidence rate for the underactive type subclinical hypothyroidism was about 8.9 per 1,000 person years.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. They found this incredibly strong inverse association. The more mushrooms people ate,
The lower their risk.
the lower their incidence of subclinical hypothyroidism. It was a clear dose-response relationship.
Okay, so let's get into the actual numbers. What did that protective effect look like? They compared the people who almost never ate mushrooms to everyone else.
Right, so the almost never group is our baseline. For people eating mushrooms just 1 to 3 times a week, the hazard ratio, the risk dropped to 0.53. Basically, a 47% reduction in risk.
Just from a few servings a week. That's already significant.
It is, but if you ramp that up to 4 or more times a week, the hazard ratio just plummets to 0.3.
A 70% reduction in risk. That's a massive protective effect from a single food item.
It's huge. But here's where the analysis gets, for me, just incredible. That protective effect wasn't spread evenly across everyone.
It was amplified in a specific group.
It was massively amplified in obese individuals, so people with a BMI of 24 or higher.
And what did the number look like for them?
For those obese individuals who were frequent mushroom eaters, that final hazard ratio dropped even further. It hit a highly, highly significant 0.14.
Wow, so an 86% reduction in risk. For the very population that often struggles the most with metabolic health, mushrooms seem to act like this targeted protective shield.
That's a perfect way to put it, a targeted shield. So the natural question is, why? What's the biological mechanism here?
It can't just be fiber.
Oh, it's definitely not just fiber. The sources point to a bunch of things working together. First, mushrooms are just fundamentally packed with bioactive compounds, polysaccharides, special proteins, minerals.
And vitamins, right?
Right, specifically vitamin D2. We know that low vitamin D levels are strongly linked to autoimmune thyroid diseases like Hashimoto's. So that's one clear pathway.
And I remember reading about enzyme inhibition, too.
You did, yes. Mushroom flavanols seem to inhibit key enzymes, anti-thyroid peroxidase and ergothioneines, which are basically gatekeepers in the process of making thyroid hormones.
So it's a multi-pronged attack, really. And when you bring obesity back into it, you have to talk about inflammation.
You absolutely do. Obesity is linked to chronic, low-grade inflammation, and mushrooms are well-known anti-inflammatories. We even have animal models showing that a specific mushroom polysaccharide, it's called DIP, it significantly reduced fat accumulation and inflammatory markers in mice.
And it changed their gut microbiome, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
It regulated the gut by decreasing what's called the firmicutes to bacteroidetes ratio. That's a microbial signature often linked to weight gain. So whether it's supporting the thyroid directly or fighting inflammation or fixing the gut, it's clear that eating mushrooms can be linked to an overall healthy body.
It's so interconnected. Okay, so moving from those broad systemic benefits, let's get really specific about the brain. And that leads to the question, what are key elements for edible mushrooms for mental and physical health?
Two compounds really stand out as brain defenders. Vitamin D, which we touched on, and a really interesting antioxidant called ergothioneine, or EGT.
Let's start with vitamin D. How do mushrooms make it?
Well, they contain something called ergosterol. It's kind of like the plant and fungi version of cholesterol. When you expose mushrooms to UV light, either sunlight or just a UV lamp, that ergosterol converts into vitamin D2.
Which makes them pretty unique in the produce aisle.
Very unique. They are potentially the only non-animal, unfortified food source that can give you a substantial amount of D2 in one serving. We're talking about UV-exposed button mushrooms packing up to 400 IU. That's a major boost.
Which is so important given the links between low vitamin D and dementia risk. But a quick practical tip for everyone listening. D2 is fat-soluble.
Ah, yes. Good point.
So if you cook your mushrooms in a lot of oil or butter, that vitamin can actually leach out into the fat. So maybe grilling or roasting is a better bet if you want to maximize that D content.
But critical detail for the kitchen. Okay, now let's talk about EGT, ergothioneine. This is a potent antioxidant, along with glutathione, that you find in high concentrations in mushrooms.
And the really big deal with EGT was the discovery of its own personal transporter in the brain.
Exactly. The ergothioneine transporter, or ETT, it's located in the blood-brain barrier. The fact that the brain has a dedicated transport system like a VIP lane just for this one antioxidant tells you how incredibly important it must be.
Its function is non-negotiable.
Yeah. It seems so. The ETT pulls EGT into the brain to protect against oxidative stress, to fight inflammation, and maybe even to help prevent things like beta-amyloid plaques from forming.
And clinically, we see a connection. Older adults who have mild cognitive impairment tend to have lower levels of EGT in their blood.
You're listening to OOTO with research by author Paul Bulow.
So that observation led to an actual intervention, right? A clinical trial.
It did, a double-blind randomized trial. They took older individuals with mild cognitive impairment and gave them EGT supplements for a full year.
And what did they find? Was it just about stopping the decline, or did they see actual improvement?
It was more like stabilization and improvement. The prolonged intake stabilized their plasma neurofilament light chain levels.
Okay, in plain English.
Right. It's a biomarker for neuronal damage. So stabilizing it suggests they were slowing down the rate of damage to brain cells. But even more importantly, participants actually improved their performance on tests of learning and memory.
So real-world cognitive benefits.
Yes, specifically on something called the Ray Auditory Verbal Learning Test. This is strong evidence. We're seeing a key component from mushrooms actively supporting the brain's defense and function.
Okay, so that brings us to the bigger picture of fungal influence on our minds. This is where it gets a little more complex. So can edible mushrooms for mental and physical health improve our mental health while supporting physical optimum performance?
This is where we have to be careful and look at the specifics. If we're talking about whole edible mushrooms, like creminous, in a clinical trial setting, the results for mood are, well, modest.
Or even neutral in some cases.
Exactly. There was one study they had people eat cremini mushrooms every day for 6 weeks. They found absolutely no differences between the mushroom group and the control group on standard anxiety or depression scores.
And that's our 10% contrary commentary. It's important to be balanced. I believe in that study, the entire group, both mushroom eaters and controls, showed some memory improvements, but it wasn't tied to the mushrooms themselves.
Correct. So you can't say that eating creminis for 6 weeks is going to cure your anxiety. However, context is everything.
Right.
The bigger epidemiological studies do suggest a link. For example, lower rates of mild cognitive impairment in Asian populations that eat more than 2 servings of mushrooms a week.
And when you look at it as part of a whole dietary pattern.
Then you see a signal again. When mushrooms are eaten as part of a healthy Mediterranean diet, for example, people report feeling more vigor, more activity, and they show better immediate memory. So it might be more about the synergy.
So the magic might not be in one single food, but in the whole healthy lifestyle that includes it. But to really understand the potential for profound mental shifts, we have to look beyond the dinner plate.
We have to. We have to look at the non-edible psilocybe fungi, not for consumption, but to understand the neurological mechanisms they reveal about how fungi can change the brain.
And this is where it gets wild. The research on naturalistic psilocybin use shows not just temporary changes, but persisting improvements in mental health.
We are talking significant, meaningful reductions in depression and anxiety, lower burnout at work and in personal life. The effect sizes are moderately large, medically significant changes.
The subjective experience is obviously profound, but the neuroimages of what's happening are just stunning. Acute psilocybin exposure causes this massive disruption of functional connectivity in the brain.
It's like a system-wide shakeup. The brain becomes desynchronized. The normal, rigid networks and distinctions just kind of dissolve.
And the key network that gets affected is the default mode network, the DMN.
Right, the DMN. That's the part of our brain that's responsible for our sense of self, our ego, our rumination, our sense of time. When the DMN desynchronizes, that's where people report those feelings of ego dissolution or oneness.
But the truly amazing part, the part that links back to performance, is that the change isn't just temporary.
No, it's the persistence that matters. Researchers found a persistent decrease in the functional connectivity between a part of the hippocampus and the DMN that lasted for weeks after the experience.
So a literal physical rewiring.
A physical rewiring. And that lasting change is what many scientists believe is the neurological basis for the long-term therapeutic effects. It's proplasticity. It allows the brain to break out of old, rigid, negative patterns.
It really does connect everything we've talked about. It synthesizes the physical and the mental.
It really does. On one hand, you have the edible mushrooms providing the fundamental building blocks, the metabolic stability, the antioxidant defense, the EGT protecting the neurons. They're laying the groundwork for physical success.
Absolutely. The dietary evidence confirms it. And that foundational health is so important. In a very real way, edible mushrooms for mental and physical health aligns our bodies to a healthy environment for both mental and physical success.
And then, on the other hand, you have related fungi demonstrating this incredible potential to act as a catalyst for deep, persistent psychological change. It forces you to take a much more holistic view.
It really does. The sheer range of benefits from vitamin D synthesis in your skin after you eat them, to regulating your gut, to EGT, protecting your neurons. It just reinforces that deep interconnectedness.
It does. It shows how edible mushrooms for mental and physical health suggests our body's health is connected to our diet, actions, nutrition, sunlight, fresh air, personal energy, and our clarity routine of alignment of our actions, words, and thoughts. It's all one system.
Okay, so let's boil this all down to give everyone listening the most important, actionable takeaways from all this material.
Let's do it. Takeaway number one for me is frequency matters for metabolic health. Eating mushrooms 4 or more times a week could be a powerful dietary strategy to lower the risk of subclinical hypothyroidism, especially if you are obese.
That is a very specific, very powerful takeaway. Okay, number 2, focus on the unique bioactives. Mushrooms are a nearly singular dietary source of ergothioneine, which your brain actively pulls in for protection, and vitamin D2, especially if they're UV treated. These are not just passive nutrients, they are active defenders of your brain.
And the third takeaway is to appreciate the sheer breadth of the fungal kingdom's potential. It ranges from promoting metabolic stability by fixing your gut microbiome, all the way to acutely restructuring the brain's core networks to provide lasting relief from mental health symptoms. It bridges physical wellness and deep psychological healing in a way few other things can.
The journey we've gone on today, it just highlights that the fungal kingdom is this vast, still largely unexplored natural pharmacy.
It really is, and it interacts with our own human systems in these incredibly potent and specific ways. It forces you to rethink the line between what we call food and what we call medicine.
It certainly does, which I think leaves us with the big question for the future. What other highly specific and potent connections exist between our gut, our metabolism, and our cognition that fungi are just uniquely equipped to address? This is a field that's just exploding.
And it demands our continued attention. We are only just scratching the surface here.
Thank you for engaging in this investigation into edible mushrooms for mental and physical health.
It was my pleasure.
We're signing off from OOTO.